The silence stretched across the encrypted channel like a taut wire, punctuated only by the rhythmic hum of rotor blades cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Somewhere over the Hindu Kush Mountains, 8 of America's most elite warriors sat motionless in the belly of a stealth helicopter, their breathing apparatus fogging in the frigid air at 12,000 feet. They had been radio silent for 47 minutes, the longest communications blackout in SEAL Team 6 history during an active operation. Then it happened, a sound that would haunt military archives for decades to come. Laughter. Not the nervous chuckle of green recruits or the gallows humor of battle-hardened veterans, but something else entirely. Pure, unrestrained joy echoing through their headsets like a ghost in the machine. "Phoenix 7 to ground control," came the voice, smooth as silk despite the chaos erupting around them. "Package delivered with a bow on top. Tea time, gentlemen." The operators exchanged glances through their night vision goggles, confusion rippling through their ranks. Tea time wasn't in any playbook they knew, but as the distinctive whine of an A-10 Thunderbolt II screamed overhead, followed by the earth-shaking percussion of precision strikes lighting up the valley below, they understood. Someone had just saved their lives, and whoever was flying that warthog was having the time of their life doing it. In the Pentagon's Crisis Management Center, 4-star generals leaned forward in their chairs, watching satellite feeds that showed impossible flight patterns. The A-10 was dancing. There was no other word for it. Banking at angles that should have stalled the aircraft, threading between mountain peaks with margins measured in meters, delivering ordnance with surgical precision while maintaining what could only be described as an aerial ballet. Major General Catherine Westbrook stood at the center of it all, her weathered hands gripping the edge of the situation table. She knew that laugh. She'd heard it 18 months ago in a dusty briefing room in Kandahar, right before they'd grounded its owner for attitude problems and failure to maintain proper military bearing. The same laugh that had echoed through the officers' club the night Lieutenant Colonel Valencia Phoenix Restrepo had been passed over for promotion for the 3rd consecutive time. The same laugh that had preceded her resignation from active duty. "Sir," whispered the communications officer, his voice barely audible above the controlled chaos of the command center. "That's not one of ours. Phoenix 7 isn't on the roster for this operation. Hell, Phoenix 7 doesn't exist in our system." Westbrook's jaw tightened. She'd spent her career watching talented pilots get chewed up by a system that valued conformity over competence, politics over performance. Valencia Restrepo had been the best stick-and-rudder pilot she'd ever seen, male or female. But the Air Force had other ideas about who belonged in their boys' club. Now apparently, Valencia had other ideas too. The helicopter touched down in friendly territory exactly 23 minutes later, its precious cargo of Navy SEALs intact and mission accomplished. But the real story was just beginning. As dawn broke over the mountains of Afghanistan, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, a ghost in an A-10 Thunderbolt II was already vanishing into the sunrise, leaving behind only questions and the lingering echo of laughter on the wind. In the weeks that followed, military intelligence would piece together fragments of the truth. Valencia Restrepo hadn't simply resigned, she'd vanished. Her service record had been mysteriously classified above most clearance levels. Her last known address was a post office box in Nevada that hadn't been used in 6 months. Even her social security number seemed to lead to dead ends, as if someone with serious resources and serious motivation had decided that Lieutenant Colonel Valencia Restrepo needed to disappear from official existence. But ghosts, as the military would soon learn, have a way of returning when they're needed most. The first hint came 3 days after the Hindu Kush incident. A Taliban convoy attempting to move high-value targets across the Pakistan border found themselves on the receiving end of precision strikes that seemed to come from nowhere. Pakistani radar stations reported no aircraft in the vicinity. American forces had no operations scheduled in that sector. Yet surveillance footage from a Predator drone operating nearby captured something impossible. The silhouette of an A-10 Thunderbolt II appearing out of the mountain haze like a metallic raptor, delivering its payload with almost supernatural accuracy, then vanishing back into the terrain. The same pattern repeated across 3 theaters of operation over the following month. Each time, radio intercepts captured the same call sign, Phoenix 7. Each time, the mysterious pilot's intervention proved decisive. And each time, she vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the tactical equivalent of a signature, precision strikes arranged in patterns that spelled out coordinates in latitude and longitude when viewed from above. Captain Marcus Tank Rodriguez had been leading SEAL operations for 7 years, long enough to recognize talent when he saw it. He'd also been around long enough to know when someone was trying to send a message. The coordinates Phoenix 7 had been leaving behind weren't random. They pointed to a pattern of failed missions, operations where air support had arrived too late or not at all, where good soldiers had died waiting for backup that never came. "She's telling a story," Rodriguez explained to his team during their debriefing at Bagram Airfield. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the cramped briefing room. Every strike location, every coordinate, they're all connected to casualties that could have been prevented with proper close air support. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, the team's communications specialist, looked up from her encrypted tablet. "Sir, I've been cross-referencing the pattern with casualty reports from the past 2 years. She's hitting locations connected to 37 KIA reports, all involving inadequate air support." The room fell silent. 37 American lives lost to bureaucracy, poor coordination, or simple bad luck. 37 families receiving folded flags and empty condolences. Rodriguez felt the familiar weight settling in his chest, the burden every operator carried, knowing that the difference between coming home and becoming a statistic often came down to factors completely beyond their control. But now, someone was taking control back. Valencia Restrepo had enlisted in the Air Force straight out of MIT, where she'd graduated summa cum laude with degrees in aerospace, engineering, and applied mathematics. The daughter of Colombian immigrants who'd built a small aviation repair business in South Texas, she'd grown up with engine oil under her fingernails and the smell of aviation fuel in her lungs. Her father, Carlos, had flown cargo planes in the Colombian Air Force before emigrating to America. Her mother, Elena, had been a flight instructor who'd taught Valencia to fly before she could legally drive. The family business, Restrepo Aviation Services, occupied a corner of a small municipal airport outside San Antonio. It was there, among the Cessnas and Pipers of weekend pilots, that Valencia had first taken the controls of an aircraft at age 12. By 16, she was performing maintenance that certified mechanics twice her age struggled with. By 18, she could fly anything with wings and had already earned her commercial pilot's license. The Air Force had recruited her aggressively, promising fast-track advancement and assignment to the most advanced aircraft in the inventory. What they hadn't mentioned was that the Old Boys Network had no intention of letting a young Latina woman break through the ceiling they'd spent generations constructing. Flight school had been the first test. Valencia finished at the top of her class, earning the coveted Top Gun award that traditionally went to pilots destined for fighter aircraft. Instead, she was assigned to transport planes. When she protested, her commanding officer had smiled condescendingly and suggested that cargo pilots were more suited to her temperament. She'd proven them wrong, of course. Her cargo runs became legendary for their precision and efficiency. She'd land massive C-130 Hercules aircraft on strips that other pilots declared impossible, deliver supplies to forward operating bases under enemy fire, and evacuate wounded soldiers with a skill that bordered on artistry. Her call sign, Phoenix, had been earned during a particularly harrowing mission when she'd coaxed a heavily damaged transport plane back to base after taking multiple hits from surface-to-air missiles. But talent, as Valencia learned, was only part of the equation in military advancement. The other part was politics, and politics required playing games she had no interest in learning. The breaking point had come during her second deployment to Afghanistan. Valencia had been flying supply runs to remote outposts when she received an emergency call from a Marine unit pinned down by Taliban fighters in a valley 30 miles from her position. The Marines were taking heavy casualties and running low on ammunition. They needed close air support, and they needed it immediately. Valencia diverted her C-130 without authorization, knowing that the aircraft's 105 howitzer could provide the fire support the Marines desperately needed. She arrived over the target area to find the Marines in a desperate firefight, their position being overrun by insurgents advancing from 3 directions. What followed was textbook close air support delivered by an aircraft that had no business being in a combat role. Valencia's precision strikes broke the enemy assault and allowed the Marines to withdraw to safety. Every single Marine in that unit went home alive because of her intervention. The Marine Corps recommended her for the Distinguished Flying Cross. The Air Force court-martialed her for operating outside her assigned mission parameters. The charges were eventually dropped after the Marine unit's commander testified on her behalf, but the message was clear. Valencia Restrepo was not the kind of pilot the Air Force wanted to promote. She could save lives, perform miracles, and earn the respect of every ground unit she supported, but she would never advance beyond lieutenant colonel as long as she insisted on putting mission accomplishment above military protocol. That realization had led to her resignation, and apparently to whatever shadowy operation was now keeping her supplied with military-grade aircraft and intelligence. Someone with significant resources believed that Valencia Restrepo's particular skills were worth the considerable risk of operating outside official channels. The question military intelligence was desperately trying to answer was, who? The answer, when it finally came, would reshape everything they thought they knew about modern warfare. CIA Deputy Director Catherine Kate Harrison had been tracking Phoenix 7's activities from a windowless office in Langley, Virginia, surrounded by classified reports and satellite imagery that painted a picture of the most effective irregular air support operation since the Flying Tigers. Harrison was old enough to remember when the agency had run similar programs in places like Laos and Nicaragua, back when plausible deniability was an art form rather than a legal necessity. She was also one of the few people in the intelligence community who knew the truth about Valencia Restrepo's disappearance from official records. The lieutenant colonel hadn't simply resigned from the Air Force. She'd been recruited by a joint CAJSOC task force designed to provide off-the-books air support for sensitive operations. The program, codenamed Lazarus, had been Harrison's brainchild, born from frustration with bureaucratic delays that cost American lives. Valencia had been the perfect candidate, supremely skilled, officially disgraced, and motivated by a desire to save lives rather than advance her career. The fact that she'd been systematically undermined by Air Force leadership only made her more valuable to Harrison's purposes. A pilot with nothing left to lose and everything to prove was exactly what Lazarus needed. The A-10 Thunderbolt II that Phoenix 7 flew wasn't stolen. It was surplus, one of dozens the Air Force had planned to mothball as part of budget cuts that Harrison considered criminally short-sighted. The Warthog's rugged construction and devastating firepower made it perfect for the kind of close air support missions that Valencia excelled at. More importantly, its relatively simple systems could be maintained by a small team of contractors operating out of remote airstrips in friendly nations. Harrison had been careful to insulate Valencia from the political machinery that had nearly destroyed her career. Phoenix 7 received her orders through encrypted channels, with full operational autonomy and zero oversight from the Pentagon bureaucrats who'd failed to recognize her value. The arrangement worked perfectly. Valencia got to do what she did best without interference, while American forces in the field received the kind of air support that saved lives and accomplished missions. The Hindu Kush operation had been a perfect example. When SEAL Team 6's helicopter had developed mechanical problems that forced them to land in hostile territory, conventional air support would have taken hours to coordinate through proper channels. Hours those SEALs didn't have. Valencia had been monitoring military frequencies from her position over the Pakistan border, ready to provide immediate assistance when needed. Her intervention had been textbook, but it had also exposed the Lazarus program to scrutiny that Harrison preferred to avoid. Too many people were asking questions about Phoenix 7, and some of those people had the clearance levels necessary to find uncomfortable answers. Harrison knew that she was walking a tightrope. Congressional oversight committees were already suspicious of unauthorized military operations, especially after several high-profile incidents involving private military contractors. If they discovered that the CIA was operating its own air force using pilots who'd been drummed out of regular service, the political fallout would be devastating. But the alternative was accepting a system that valued procedure over performance, that would rather lose American lives than bend regulations. Harrison had spent 30 years in the intelligence community watching good people die because of bureaucratic inertia. She'd be damned if she was going to let it happen on her watch. The secure phone on her desk buzzed with an encrypted message from her liaison at JSOC. The subject line was simple: Phoenix 7 requesting immediate tasking. Harrison smiled as she opened the message. Valencia Restrepo was ready for her next mission, and Harrison had the perfect assignment in mind. In the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, a convoy of American contractors had gone missing while transporting supplies to a remote base. Satellite imagery suggested they'd been captured by Taliban forces and were being held in a compound that conventional forces couldn't reach without causing an international incident. The terrain was too rough for helicopters, too well defended for a ground assault, and too politically sensitive for official military action. It was, in other words, exactly the kind of problem that Phoenix 7 existed to solve. Valencia received the tasking while performing routine maintenance on her A-10 at a small airstrip in Tajikistan, one of several former Soviet bases that the CIA had negotiated access to under various counterterrorism agreements. The facility looked abandoned from the outside: rusted hangars and cracked runways that appeared to have been neglected since the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan. In reality, it was a sophisticated operations center staffed by contractors and intelligence personnel who maintained the fiction that Lazarus didn't exist. The mission briefing was transmitted through encrypted channels, accompanied by satellite imagery and intelligence reports that painted a clear picture of the situation. 5 American contractors, including 2 former Special Forces soldiers, were being held in a Taliban compound built into the side of a mountain. The compound was heavily fortified, with anti-aircraft weapons positioned to defend against helicopter assault. Worse, intelligence indicated that the captives would be moved to Pakistan within 24 hours, where recovering them would become exponentially more difficult. Valencia studied the imagery on her tablet while her maintenance crew completed pre-flight checks on her A-10. The compound's defenses were formidable but not insurmountable. The anti-aircraft guns were older Soviet models that would be ineffective against a properly executed low-level attack. The compound's position on the mountainside actually worked in her favor. She could approach from below, using the terrain to mask her approach until she was close enough to deliver precision strikes. The challenge would be extracting the hostages. The A-10 was a devastating attack aircraft, but it wasn't designed for rescue operations. She'd need to disable the compound's defenses and create an opportunity for a ground team to extract the contractors. That meant coordinating with assets she couldn't officially communicate with, using timing and positioning to orchestrate a complex operation without direct command and control. It was the kind of mission that required improvisation, split-second decision-making, and the ability to adapt when plans inevitably went wrong. In other words, it was exactly the kind of mission Valencia had been training for her entire career. She launched from the Tajikistan airstrip at 300 local time, her A-10 loaded with a carefully selected mix of ordnance designed for precision strikes against fortified positions. The flight to the target area would take 90 minutes, following a route that avoided Pakistani radar installations and kept her below the detection threshold of Afghan air defense systems. As she climbed into the pre-dawn darkness, Valencia felt the familiar calm that settled over her before combat operations. The cockpit of the A-10 was her natural environment, every switch and display as familiar as her own heartbeat. The aircraft responded to her touch like a living thing, its twin engines providing the power and reliability that had made the Warthog legendary among ground forces. But tonight was different. Tonight, she wasn't just providing close air support for troops in contact. She was conducting a unilateral rescue operation that would either save 5 American lives or create an international incident that could expose the entire Lazarus program. The stakes couldn't be higher, and she was completely on her own. Exactly the way she preferred it. The compound appeared on her navigation display as a cluster of buildings carved into the mountainside, connected by narrow roads that switch back down the slope toward the valley floor. Intelligence photos had shown the layout in detail: guard towers at the corners, anti-aircraft positions on the flat areas, and a central courtyard where the hostages were believed to be held. Valencia began her attack run from the south, approaching the compound at treetop level to avoid radar detection. The A-10's GAU-8 Avenger cannon was designed to destroy main battle tanks, but it was equally effective against concrete bunkers and guard towers. Her first pass would eliminate the anti-aircraft threat, her second would breach the compound's perimeter, and her third would create the chaos necessary for a ground extraction. But as she lined up for her first attack run, Valencia's radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. "Phoenix 7, this is Reaper 2. We have eyes on your target area and are standing by for coordination." Valencia's blood ran cold. Reaper call signs belonged to MQ-9 drone aircraft operated by the Air Force. Official Air Force assets weren't supposed to know about her operation, much less be providing support for it. Either her mission had been compromised, or someone very high up the chain of command had decided to provide off-the-books assistance. "Reaper 2, Phoenix 7, she responded carefully. "I show no authorized assets in my operating area. Please confirm your authority and mission." "Phoenix 7, we're operating under JSOC tasking in support of hostage recovery. We have thermal imaging of the compound and confirmed location of 5 American personnel in the southeast building. Advise when you're ready to commence attack." JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, the same organization that ran SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force. If they were involved, this mission had just become exponentially more complex and more dangerous. JSOC didn't deploy Reaper drones for routine operations, which meant someone at the highest levels of the military had decided that recovering these 5 contractors was worth risking exposure of classified programs. Valencia made a decision that would define the rest of her career. Instead of aborting the mission or requesting clarification through official channels, she chose to trust the voice on the other end of the radio. Sometimes, the best option was to leap into the unknown and trust that your training would see you through. "Reaper 2, Phoenix 7, beginning attack run now. Light up the anti-aircraft positions with laser designation." What followed was a masterpiece of coordination between 2 aircraft that officially weren't supposed to exist in the same battle space. The Reaper drone's advanced sensors painted targets with laser energy, providing precision guidance for Valencia's ordnance while maintaining overwatch of the entire compound. Valencia's A-10 became an instrument of surgical destruction, eliminating threats with the precision of a scalpel, while avoiding any risk to the hostages below. The first pass destroyed both anti-aircraft positions in a coordinated strike that lasted less than 10 seconds. The second pass breached the compound's outer wall and eliminated the guard towers, creating multiple entry points for a ground assault. The third pass was pure psychological warfare, low-level flights that shattered windows and sent Taliban defenders fleeing for cover. Then, impossibly, Valencia heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors echoing off the mountain walls. Phoenix 7, this is Dustoff 6. We're inbound for package pickup. Can you provide top cover while we extract the precious cargo? Dustoff was the call sign for medical evacuation helicopters, but Valencia knew that voice. She'd heard it before, during her final deployment with the Air Force. Master Sergeant Angela Rivera had been her crew chief, the woman responsible for keeping Valencia's transport aircraft flying despite the constant wear of combat operations. Now, apparently, Rivera was flying rescue helicopters for the same shadowy organization that employed Valencia. The extraction took 12 minutes from start to finish. Rivera's helicopter landed in the compound's courtyard while Valencia circled overhead, ready to engage any Taliban reinforcements that might threaten the operation. The 5 American contractors were loaded aboard and evacuated to a secure facility in Afghanistan, where they would be debriefed and returned to their families. Mission accomplished, with 0 casualties and minimal international incident potential. Just another day's work for an operation that officially didn't exist. But as Valencia flew back toward her base in Tajikistan, she realized that something fundamental had changed. The Lazarus program was expanding, bringing together personnel who'd been cast aside by the regular military despite their exceptional skills. Rivera, like Valencia, had been passed over for promotion despite exemplary performance. Other voices she'd heard on the radio had been familiar. Pilots and operators who'd been quietly forced out of regular service for various administrative reasons. Someone was building a shadow military composed of the most talented personnel the regular services had discarded. The question was, who was behind it, and what did they ultimately plan to accomplish? The answer would come sooner than Valencia expected, in the form of a mission that would test every skill she'd developed during her career. But first, she had to survive the political storm that was about to engulf the Lazarus program. News of the contractor rescue operation had reached the Pentagon within hours of its completion, setting off alarm bells throughout the military's chain of command. Too many people had monitored radio traffic from the operation, and too many questions were being asked about aircraft that weren't supposed to exist conducting missions that hadn't been authorized through proper channels. Defense Secretary Margaret Chan had called an emergency meeting of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to address what she termed unauthorized military operations being conducted in her department's name. The meeting took place in the Pentagon's most secure conference room, surrounded by electromagnetic shielding that prevented any electronic surveillance. "Gentlemen," Chen began, her voice carrying the authority that had made her one of the most effective defense secretaries in recent history, "we have a problem. Someone is conducting military operations using our equipment, our intelligence, and our protocols, but without our authorization. This ends now." General Raymond Mitchell, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, had been dreading this conversation. As the military's senior officer, he was ultimately responsible for all American military operations worldwide. The fact that effective combat missions were being conducted without his knowledge was both professionally embarrassing and potentially catastrophic for his career. But Mitchell was also a pragmatist who understood that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing weren't identical. The contractor rescue operation had been flawlessly executed, saving 5 American lives without causing any collateral damage or international incidents. From a purely military perspective, it had been exactly the kind of operation that exemplified American special operations capabilities. Madam Secretary, Mitchell replied carefully, preliminary investigation suggests that these operations are being conducted by personnel with appropriate security clearances and access to legitimate intelligence. While the command structure is unconventional, the results speak for themselves. Chen's expression hardened. She'd spent her career in the defense industry before accepting the secretary position, and she understood the importance of maintaining clear chains of command and accountability. Unauthorized operations, regardless of their effectiveness, represented a threat to civilian control of the military that she couldn't tolerate. General, I don't care if these operations are being run by George Washington himself. If they're not properly authorized, they're a threat to national security and a violation of everything we swore to protect. I want them shut down immediately, and I want the personnel involved identified and prosecuted to the full extent of military law. Air Force Chief of Staff General Patricia Adams shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She'd been following the Phoenix 7 incidents with particular interest, partly because they involved her service's aircraft, and partly because she suspected she knew the pilot's identity. Valencia Restrepo's resignation had been one of the most frustrating personnel losses of Adams' tenure as Chief of Staff. The woman was simply the most gifted pilot Adams had ever encountered, male or female. Madam Secretary, Adams interjected, if I may suggest a different approach. These operations are clearly being conducted by highly skilled personnel with access to sophisticated intelligence and equipment. Rather than attempting to prosecute them, perhaps we should consider bringing them back into the fold. The results they're producing are exactly what we need in the current strategic environment. Chen's eyes narrowed. She'd expected resistance from the military leadership, but she hadn't anticipated open advocacy for what amounted to military insubordination. The fact that senior officers were defending unauthorized operations suggested that the problem was more widespread than she'd initially realized. General Adams, are you suggesting that we reward insubordination and violation of military law? Because that's exactly what we'd be doing if we legitimized these operations after the fact. Before Adams could respond, the conference room's secure communications system activated with an encrypted message marked for immediate attention. The communications officer who delivered it wore the kind of expression that suggested the message's contents were about to complicate an already difficult situation. Madam Secretary, the officer reported, we're receiving reports of a major terrorist attack in progress in Somalia. American diplomatic personnel are under siege at the embassy compound in Mogadishu, and regular military assets are too far away to provide immediate assistance. Chen felt her stomach drop. Somalia was a political nightmare, the kind of place where American military involvement inevitably led to congressional hearings and media criticism. But if American diplomats were under attack, she had no choice but to authorize whatever response was necessary to protect them. What assets do we have in the region? She asked. Madam Secretary, the nearest conventional forces are in Djibouti, at least 4 hours away by helicopter. We have a destroyer in the Indian Ocean, but it would take hours to launch and coordinate airstrikes. The embassy is requesting immediate assistance. They're reporting casualties and estimate they can hold their position for less than 2 hours. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. American personnel were about to die while the most powerful military in the world struggled to coordinate a response through proper channels. It was exactly the kind of scenario that irregular operations like Lazarus existed to address. Chen's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message. The sender was listed as anonymous, but the message was clear. Phoenix 7 is airborne and 30 minutes from Mogadishu, standing by for tasking. Valencia had been conducting routine patrol flights over the Horn of Africa when the emergency transmission from the American embassy had crackled through her radio. The diplomat making the call, Ambassador Patricia Williams, had been trying to reach any American military assets in the region as hundreds of armed insurgents stormed the embassy compound. Any American military aircraft, this is Embassy Mogadishu. We are under heavy attack and require immediate assistance. We have 15 American personnel trapped in the main building with approximately 200 hostiles attempting to breach our defenses. Request immediate close air support. Valencia didn't hesitate. She changed course for Mogadishu, simultaneously transmitting her position to the emergency frequency and requesting permission to engage hostile forces threatening American personnel. The authorization came back through encrypted channels within minutes, along with detailed intelligence about the embassy's layout and the insurgent positions. But this mission was different from anything Valencia had attempted before. The embassy compound was located in the heart of Mogadishu, surrounded by civilian buildings and infrastructure. Any airstrikes would have to be incredibly precise to avoid collateral damage that could create an international incident. Worse, the insurgents were using human shields and had positioned themselves in ways that made conventional air support extremely difficult. Valencia was going to have to get creative. The A-10 Thunderbolt II wasn't designed for urban combat operations, but Valencia had been modifying her tactics to adapt to the changing nature of modern warfare. Instead of the high-explosive ordnance typically used against armored targets, she'd loaded her aircraft with precision-guided munitions designed for urban environments. Each weapon could be programmed to detonate at specific altitudes and directions, allowing for surgical strikes that minimized blast effects. As she approached Mogadishu, Valencia could see smoke rising from the embassy compound. The main building was surrounded by insurgent positions that had been carefully planned to prevent helicopter evacuation or ground assault. Machine gun nests were positioned to cover all approaches, while rocket-propelled grenade teams were ready to engage any aircraft that attempted close air support. It was a sophisticated defensive arrangement that suggested the attack had been planned by someone with detailed knowledge of American military tactics. Valencia realized she was facing an enemy that had studied her capabilities and prepared countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize the advantages of air support. The first pass was reconnaissance, allowing Valencia to assess the tactical situation and identify priority targets. She could see muzzle flashes from insurgent positions around the embassy's perimeter, concentrated on the building's eastern side, where the attackers were attempting to breach the main entrance. Embassy personnel were returning fire from fortified positions, but they were clearly outnumbered and running low on ammunition. Valencia keyed her radio. "Embassy Mogadishu, this is Phoenix 7. I have eyes on your position and am ready to provide immediate fire support. Can you mark your positions with colored smoke?" "Phoenix 7 Embassy. We're deploying red smoke to mark our positions now. Be advised, the hostiles are using civilian buildings as firing positions. We need precision strikes only." Red smoke began billowing from the embassy's rooftops, clearly delineating American positions from insurgent locations. Valencia programmed her first strike carefully, targeting a machine gun nest that was preventing embassy security from reaching better defensive positions. The precision-guided munition detonated exactly 3 feet above the insurgent position, directing its blast downward while minimizing damage to surrounding structures. The effect was immediate and devastating. The machine gun position was eliminated, while insurgents in nearby buildings began withdrawing to positions that offered better protection from air attack. Valencia had announced her presence in a way that demonstrated both her capabilities and her restraint, exactly the kind of psychological warfare that could turn the tide of an urban battle. Her second pass targeted a cluster of insurgents who had been advancing on the embassy's main entrance. This time, Valencia used her GAU-8 cannon, delivering short bursts of depleted uranium rounds that shredded the attackers while leaving nearby civilian structures intact. The cannon's distinctive sound, a deep, mechanical roar that seemed to shake the earth itself, sent insurgents fleeing for cover throughout the compound. But the real challenge came when Valencia spotted insurgent positions on the rooftops of civilian buildings surrounding the embassy. The attackers had established sniper positions and rocket-propelled grenade teams in apartments and offices, using civilians as human shields while they poured fire down on the American position. Engaging targets in civilian buildings required a level of precision that pushed both Valencia and her aircraft to their absolute limits. Each strike had to be calculated to neutralize the threat, while avoiding any risk to innocent civilians who might be trapped in the buildings. Valencia found herself making split-second decisions about angles of attack, munition selection, and timing that would have challenged a team of tactical planners working with unlimited time. She solved the problem by using the A-10's unique capabilities in ways that the aircraft's designers had never intended. Instead of conducting traditional attack runs, Valencia began flying what could only be described as aerial artillery missions. She positioned her aircraft at precise angles that allowed her to deliver cannon fire through windows and openings in the buildings, eliminating insurgent positions while avoiding structural damage that could harm civilians. The technique required flying at extremely low speeds and altitudes, making Valencia's aircraft vulnerable to ground fire. But the psychological effect was overwhelming. Insurgents who had felt safe behind human shields suddenly found themselves exposed to precision fire that seemed to come from impossible angles. Many simply abandoned their positions and fled. The tide of battle began to turn as embassy security personnel, now protected from sniper fire, were able to establish better defensive positions and coordinate their response. The insurgents' carefully planned attack was unraveling as their tactical advantages were systematically eliminated by an opponent they hadn't anticipated. But Valencia knew that her intervention was only buying time. The embassy personnel were still outnumbered and would eventually be overwhelmed if they weren't evacuated or reinforced. She needed to create an opportunity for extraction, which meant eliminating enough insurgent forces to allow helicopters to land safely. That's when Valencia made a decision that would define her legend among military aviators for generations to come. Instead of continuing to provide defensive fire support, she began hunting insurgent forces throughout the city, systematically destroying their command and control capabilities, while avoiding any actions that could harm civilian populations. What followed was urban air combat of a type that had never been attempted before. Valencia turned her A-10 into a precision instrument of urban warfare, using the aircraft's rugged construction and powerful armament to engage targets in confined spaces, while maintaining the situational awareness necessary to avoid civilian casualties. She targeted insurgent vehicles attempting to bring reinforcements to the embassy, disabling them with cannon fire that left nearby buildings untouched. She eliminated communication equipment that insurgent commanders were using to coordinate their attack, severing their ability to maintain unified action. Most importantly, she began targeting insurgent leaders who had positioned themselves in secure locations throughout the city, believing that their urban environment would protect them from air attack. Valencia proved them wrong, one precision strike at a time. The embassy siege lasted 6 hours and 37 minutes from start to finish. When it ended, American diplomatic personnel were safely evacuated by Marine helicopters that landed in a secure perimeter that Valencia had cleared through systematic elimination of insurgent positions. Total American casualties: 3 wounded, none killed. Total civilian casualties: 0. The insurgent force that had attacked the embassy was effectively destroyed as a combat organization. Their leaders were dead, their equipment was destroyed, and their survivors had fled the city. It was the kind of tactical victory that military academies would study for decades, accomplished by a single pilot flying an aircraft that most experts considered unsuitable for urban operations. But the real impact of the Mogadishu operation wasn't tactical. It was political. Valencia's intervention had been monitored by intelligence agencies around the world, including several that were hostile to American interests. The fact that the United States could deploy effective military force anywhere in the world within hours, using assets that didn't appear on any official roster, sent a message that would reshape international relations. The message was simple. American military capabilities were more extensive and more flexible than anyone had imagined. And at the center of those capabilities was a pilot who had been officially dismissed from service, but who had just demonstrated tactical skills that bordered on the supernatural. Defense Secretary Chen received a detailed briefing on the Mogadishu operation while flying back to Washington aboard her official aircraft. The briefing materials included gun camera footage from Valencia's A-10, communications intercepts from the embassy siege, and intelligence assessments from multiple agencies. By the time she'd finished reviewing the materials, Chen's perspective on the Lazarus program had undergone a fundamental transformation. The pilot she'd been planning to prosecute for unauthorized military operations had just saved 15 American lives while conducting one of the most tactically sophisticated urban air operations in military history. The program she'd wanted to shut down had proved its value in the most convincing way possible, by accomplishing a mission that conventional forces couldn't have completed. Chen was experienced enough to recognize when her initial assessment had been wrong. She was